Hi, Cara Smyth.
Hello, Louis Perkins and friends and friends.
That's right, and friends. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Happy to be with you.
I'm so glad to get to talk with you today. Tell me where you are right now and how are you doing?
I am in New York City, and New York City is improving. I was one of the diehards, I think, that stayed. But it's starting to loosen up and feel better. And so, looking for the rebirth of all of what we miss about the city. But it's shifting.
Absolutely. Well, I've missed you and I've missed New York a lot. And I know that many of us who are so used to getting to work together and see each other, I mean, it just feels like a real void to not have that opportunity, this past year. But we've done well with our tech.
We have. You miss I would call that maybe creative collisions. The by accident meeting people in a hallway or at a conference, and it's, oh, do you know this one and do you know that one? Absolutely. So that, I think, we're doing well with our tech, yes, but a little bit I miss that, what happens by accident in between, that we have a little less of.
Well, I think, for those that are listening to this, so this is being recorded in May of 2021, and maybe it'll come back in the future as people find these podcasts. And so we are in many ways feeling in the United States like we're coming towards the tail end of this, and yet globally we absolutely are not. And many of our partners in global supply chains are feeling the worst effects of this pandemic. And so it's an unusual time for that reason, because I think we're all sort of feeling, we thought we were all getting closer, and now it feels like we just can't take anything for granted.
I know it's true. I mean, the more you talk to the people around the world and hear where they are, any kind of easing off doesn't feel as celebratory, let's say. It's a hard time to watch what's happening around the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, so being together in person makes me think about all the time that we have been together in our convening of conveners, which I want to talk about, because the first time I met you, and I certainly want to hear the story of how you have evolved into your role in the fashion industry. But the first time I met you, I think Jason Kibbe had suggested that I have a call with you. This would have been nearly 3 years ago, going back into sometime in 2018. And you had the wisdom to see that we were asking the industry to participate in collective action, and yet many of us in the programmatic nonprofit and world of designing and developing these tools and programs and resources meant to align, but we weren't as well as we could be. So that's when I first met you, and you were I thought, who is this force of nature? Amazing. Whatever she's doing, I'm doing it with her. That's all.
Well, back at you. So I thought the same when I met you too. So it's good that we're connected now and together, for sure.
Absolutely. So we'll get to the conveners, but I'd love to hear, you've been working in apparel and fashion for a while. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got into the sector to begin with.
So I guess somehow always wanted to work in fashion, and I'm not really sure that I knew what that meant. Kind of a lot of things that you don't know when you're young. I graduated from college and thought it must be easier for a woman to work in menswear rather than women's, which is totally not true and has no basis of fact or sense. But that's what I thought when I was a kid. So I applied to a lot of men's companies, ended up working at Hugo Boss on the wholesale sales side. From there, landed at Jill Sander, from Jill Sander to Burberry, kind of a thing. But always grew up on the track of how do you grow income and image for brands. So I am now a sustainability warrior, which is slightly unlikely, but there it is.
Sure. And so when did that sustainability seed emerge in your life and in this work?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I lived in Europe for about 15 years between the Jill Sander, Burberry, and some other things I had done in Italy. And I was moving back to the States just around the time of the Rana Plaza factory collapse. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting to go and continue my career in fashion, and was interviewing with 2 big fashion companies at the time, and suddenly kind of made a hard right, because I was at an event and heard somebody say, oh, I wish fashion could be different. And it got my wheels turning. What would it look like if fashion was different? And what would my background do? You know, where could I be helpful? Where could I be useful? So I think I started to explore a little bit. I begged a friend to take me to a conference at the UN and heard Ban Ki-moon talking about what was MDG's prior, now Sustainable Development Goals, calling on CEOs to be corporate statesmen. And it was kind of like one of the first aha light bulb moments, because I thought, if I was still sitting in my old C-suite seat, would I know what to do with underwater life and partnerships for peace? Wonderful North Star, not really that practical. And then spent time with some of the nonprofits and saw amazing information there, maybe not folks that have run P&Ls in the business always. So there's maybe a bit of a gap. Then we had Wall Street talking about what's now environmental, social, and governance, or data-driven ESG. Then you have scientists talking about planetary boundaries. So it seemed like lots of different languages being spoken, and maybe not so easy for the brands actually to figure out how to shift our system. And so that's how I landed there, kind of thinking, what if we could get in the middle of that, in the middle of all of those different languages, and align the partners. And I was actually at a Sustainable Apparel Coalition conference around that time many years ago, interestingly, and was talking to a friend from Patagonia who said, oh, you know, you've got to rebrand it. Can you make sustainability sexy somehow? And weirdly, after that, I thought, what happens if we start with operating efficiencies that reduce impacts, which will be comfortable for everybody? And so jumped in the door of the different CEOs that I grew up with in the business, I would say, and asked, can we all get around a table? Where are we on sustainability? Can we get around a table and see if we can make some collective impact and make some progress together? So yeah, it was, I think, I guess I would say a Rana Plaza jump off, and maybe the recognition that it's not that easy for the industry to change in the ways that we want them to.
Sure. Well, I love that your background experience in C-suite with access to C-suite gave you that mindset and that thinking of how do we operationalize this to that thinker who has to operate from, whether it's privately held or publicly traded, operate from that P&L approach. And so did that go off right away? I mean, was this like, I can translate this, or was it, this has to be translated or it will fail, or what was the thought?
You know what, I think I thought, if we're always working and preaching to the choir, kind of all of the sustainability people that have been around doing such amazing work all these years already, the outdoor people obviously were leading. But it felt to me like if there's not budget, prioritization, headroom for those people to do their best work in the companies, we're going to get stuck a little bit. And so this idea of how do we kind of creep into that conversation? I mean, even the idea, could we get a group of CEOs in a room to talk about sustainability? I didn't know. We thought it might be a one-off breakfast the first time. And we started with 16 CEOs the first round. And that was really on the idea almost of a man's shirt. So I went to a couple of the big ones and said, 14 to 18 pieces of packaging in every man's shirt. Look at the trash. I folded it in a different way. I took out 8 pieces or whatever it was, 8 cents, five pieces of packaging and 8 cents a unit. And suddenly it was like, oh, that just kind of makes sense. Why don't we get around a table and see retailers and brands together if we could have some conversation and make decisions? And Lord knows changing a shirt does not impact the world. What it did impact, I think, was the CEO's recognition of, if we are here in a quiet space, having conversation and dialogue, we can actually do stuff. We can decide. So what is the collective impact agenda? Who are all of the smart nonprofits that are there that could guide us? And one of the funny CEOs at the time said, Cara, I don't have a VP of greenhouse gases. I didn't know we were making them. I don't know how to get rid of them. And we need help, but we don't even have the internal expertise to figure out who to align with. So we need facilitation. So it happened off of a shirt and then crept into all of the key areas that everybody's made commitments and goals around. And yeah, here we are. Well, so eight years later.
I would, yes, and exactly 8 years since Rana Plaza. And I would say I have two questions there. One is, don't minimize the impact of that shirt project, because we know there's no silver bullet. We know that everything, if you look at it, almost gamify the carbon emission reductions, the water savings, the waste stream, collective savings. We know that it is going to be a multitude of initiatives that are all going to get us incrementally there, and that we have to do all of it, right? So what you did, in my opinion, was you were able to show them, look what you can do with this small measure. Now imagine if we could identify all of these measures and start to pull them together. And as I've known you, that's what I've heard from you and seen in your leadership, which is great and important. And then two, 8 years. What have you seen change in this 8 years?
I think I would say the priority and recognition that if you're not running a sustainable business, you're not going to maybe have a business that sustains. I think there was somehow some illusion, and even around the time we were starting, there was a lot of like, shame on you, CEO, that you're running a profitable company, which is a fiduciary responsibility. So that's kind of not fair, actually. And I think there was also this, CEOs don't care. And that's also not true. There's not a CEO in the world that's going to say, I don't care about the labor conditions. I'm not interested in soil health. So what about packaging? And so what about landfill? And all I want to do is sell more. These people have children and grandchildren as well. So the question is, I have an obligation to run my company in a certain way, but I also want it to be different. And I think the sort of very safe space of, we don't really know how to do this, and let's be authentic about it and try to hash it out, which we're still, all of us collaboratively doing 8 years later. We're still trying to hash it out. I think the big shift is everybody wants to run a responsible business. I think there's a collision of priorities among stakeholders. So the investors are saying, I want data-driven, brand-aligned ESG KPIs, because those companies are more resilient, outperform, and I know where your material business risks are. Then we have consumers saying, I care. Where is my stuff made? What's in it? What are the chemicals? What are the labor conditions? Do you have an inclusive and diverse mindset? Do you have that in your supply chain? So I think between the investors that care, consumers that care, and lots of data around that employees, 70% of employees want to work for purpose-driven companies. And then we have climate change. You and I were, I think about a year ago, talking about, there's now something like 2,500 days left before irreversible climate change, and how many seasons of soil health before we have that problem. So I think it keeps coming closer, and stakeholder capitalism, business roundtable, and all of those commitments, there's a new mindset. I think CEOs have to be advocates and well-versed and fluent in all of the issues if they are going to maintain investor, consumer, and employee loyalty and do right by the planet. So big shift. And the pandemic helped us, I think. I
did. What did you observe about how the pandemic helped this work? What are you observing? Because we're still in it.
Yeah. I would say, as kind of a sustainability nerd, I was very worried it might wash out to sea. I had felt before the pandemic, the fashion conveners were all talking. There was so much movement. You could see the CEOs really committed to both the UN goals, their own goals, looking at all of what the financial community wanted. So it felt like there was such a great current of change. And then suddenly the world stopped, and I thought, it's finished now. By the time anybody starts to think about this again, when fashion didn't really know what its future looked like, and had never experienced stores are closing, shoppers are not shopping, we're all at home, look at the ripple effect all the way through the supply chain. And I thought, well, everybody's going to be trying to save their business, and this will drop off the agenda. And actually the opposite happened. I think instead, this collision of market forces, the consumers, the investors, the people, that everybody cares, was only amplified and accelerated. So I think that's a terrific thing. I heard somebody say 2030 jumped into 2020. So now we're more digital. We're more worried about these things. We're concerned about our health. We're concerned about platforms and brands. So there's this responsible reset which I guess is a silver lining of what we experienced and are still experiencing around the world. And that feels, after a long, hard year and still the hard things we're going through, also all the racial inequity, you know, the mindful consideration for others feels like the angels put us in a timeout chair for a year or so and are giving us another shot at doing it differently.
I love the way you said that, and I think from a philosophical and spiritual perspective, you know, we really were given this moment in history to pause and look at our relationship to everything we're doing, from our work to our families, our homes, and certainly our purchasing patterns. And so as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about, as an executive or CEO or founder of any company or brand, what's up for debate is, how will this come back? What will it look like? And will consumers have a different relationship to how they're looking at stuff in a way that, you know, I think some of the predictions I've read, that is, you know, we'll get back to the market will get back by 2025, but it might not, if people tend to look at ownership and business models related to fashion differently, where sharing, vintage, resell, repair, all this now becomes a lot more interesting than it was 14 months ago, right?
For sure, for sure. You know, I think it's really interesting too, like other step changes besides our mindfulness post-pandemic. I think the acceleration of what technology will do, so we can be smarter. Where should inventory be? How am I purchasing? Let's think about customer personalization as it relates to sustainability. Can I be smarter about the people that buy things from me? So maybe I can produce less. You know, I think all of that, and scenario modeling. And so even thinking about, what is my footprint as it relates to even my expenses? The technology is allowing a completely new view as we come back. And I think that will power, to your point, all of the re's in retail: repair, reuse, recycle, you know, all of the swapping. Where is all of that merchandise going to go? I think that old vintage, what used to be like a vintage market, is a whole new business for brands to capture and make less. So I think this is all still part of this, you know, build it back better, as everybody is calling it, and it's going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as that market is growing, why not have that be part of your revenue stream? Not give that market share value on the table. Don't give it to somebody else, right? Build it into your own model. And in essence, that also creates that extended producer responsibility role. It presents a longer term life cycle relationship to the customer consumer past retail. So, you know, to me, it's kind of a no brainer, but we didn't see it several years ago in the same way. It was a concept, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, the domino effect of EU regulations and what we know is coming downstream, even just, you know, in so many ways, but the EU pressure on investors to say, how clean or dirty is your portfolio of brands? And then the investors are turning and saying, oh, how clean or dirty is your company? And, oh, if you have a science-based target, you need to get how far back into the supply chain. So you need that visibility, you need that track and trace, you need all of those KPIs, even with your partners. So the new, like, we need to move forward, almost like in a rugby scrum, of linking arms end to end and saying, even to the suppliers and upstream and down, how are we going to move this forward? Because there is, another nice thing of the pandemic, I don't think we're ever going to go back. I don't think this will ever be like, oh, remember that when sustainability was trendy or there was greenwashing. We're coming to an apples to apples comparison on the footprint of companies and the need to share that publicly because everybody wants to know. That, I think, is quite a catalyst of sort of a new world order, I hope.
Yeah, I do too. And you and I are both optimists. I know we're also pragmatic in a lot of ways, I think. And so for that reason, I'm thinking about something that our friend Julie Gilhart said to me years ago when we were starting the Fashion Positive, is you've just got to make this simple, and you've got to tell brands, designers, you know, individuals inside these companies how to get started. You know, they just want to know how to get started. And I think you saw how complex it was to have that conversation with somebody who's flying at this level. When you start rattling off the 35 organizations you should be involved with, it's like eyes glass over and everybody shuts down, right? So
Totally.
what you did about that was really pull the group of us together, and not the whole world, and we hopefully will bring together the world of all partners and NGOs, but you started with some key organizations. Tell us about convening the conveners, as we started calling it, with your direction.
So that was, I would say, at some of the CEO's behest, because back to this joke of I don't have a VP of greenhouse gases and of the issues. How do we even know who to align with? And there was some conversation in the CEO meetings, and we even did a slide of, here are all of the organizations you need to align with. Here's where all of the conferences are. Here's all of the people that whoever you have on your sustainability team, which is often a small team, are trying to talk to and dialogue with in order to figure out how to shift and move your company forward. And I actually took a walk, Karen Newman, a friend of ours from the United Nations, and she said, oh, Cara, a fashion company came to me through the UN and said, if I'm trying to start on my journey, to your point, like with Julie, where should I begin? And we were walking on the West Side Highway in New York, and it took me 6 miles to explain to her, well, if you're going to start with raw materials, you need to think about textile exchange, and then there's the Organic Cotton Accelerator, and then there's BCI and cotton ink, and then and all of those certifications. So you'll need to learn about all of, and then there's of course responsible wool and responsible dam, and then what about when you get into facilities and how are you managing that? And so by the time it took me 6 miles of a walk, I thought, well, that's kind of a problem, and I can see why the CEOs are saying it's overwhelming to understand who are the team captains. So if we're all here in a room, competitors, often publicly traded, working pre-competitively on sustainability, why aren't the nonprofits? And truth be told, I think that's difficult because the nonprofits are all trying to dialogue with the brands and often looking for similar funding. So there's something competitive even in the nonprofit world, which then allows or disallows the collaboration may be necessary to simplify, to your earlier point. And so first I went out to the SAC and I said, all of the CEOs are wondering why they're together and we're not. So can the key nonprofits come together? And it took me a year until I got our crowd convinced. And as you know, we went to London the first time, holed up in the Conduit, which was a sustainable-minded club at the time, for a few days, and tried to understand our swim lanes. Where do we overlap? And I think we all happily realized we overlapped way less than we thought. And actually working collaboratively with that Venn diagram, lining up sort of 12 or 15 of the key nonprofits, we have the ability to create holistic solutions together. And so I think the CEOs and all of the liaisons, all of the company folks that we work with are super happy that we've begun that ongoing dialogue. I mean, we're together, as you know, every month. Now it's 2.5 years that we're together, or coming up even on 3. And so I think there too, like we're all trying to make progress and figure out what does that look like. But it feels really important that there are these ecosystems of change. The CEOs are together, the liaisons are together, they're all supporting. How does the UN come in? How do the nonprofits come in? Back to that 5 different groups speaking 5 different languages when we started. If we're not making it easy for each other, I think then we can't throw our hands up and say, oh, well, if only the governments would, or if only citizens would, or if only the brands, it's all of we're all at fault. I'm at fault as a citizen and a consumer for buying and for all of the ripple effect of what happens. And we're all somehow at fault with our organizations. So stepping into the center in constructive collaboration feels ever more important if we're going to untangle what we need to untangle in the time we have left.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that work, I think, has been tremendously important because there are things that we know that we're doing together. And then there are things that are happening because we came together as conveners. Yeah. There are, just top of mind right now, because we were just approving some copy for a financial tools impact report that we're working on with Fashion for Good, that HSBC is funding us. And we saw the dots, we connected them. You're working on innovation, we're working on efficiencies. There's bigger pieces around coal elimination and energy, and it's going to take some disruption. we both together complete this story. Let's use they're being funded by the bank, we're being funded by, let's use this together and present one story. And I think those things seem so simple and no-brainer, but how hard it is to sometimes connect dots when you're in silos. And as you pointed out, it's not that we mean to be in them. It's just if we're funded for certain things, if we're not aware of each other's, if we have certain regional focus or brands that are driving a certain agenda, we don't talk and we don't align, right? And then the other thing that I'd say, and this is sort of my call to the philanthropic and funding community, is when we're in scarcity, then we start to say, well, gosh, should I get that grant or should they get that grant? And what you've helped us do is say, wait, why don't we get it together? Why don't we work on this project together if we're both interested in it and bring two pieces to the puzzle? So, yeah.
I think it's of critical importance. And you know what? I think there's maybe we had a good jump off, I think, with our CEOs because there was a long time that required quiet conversation. Mm-hmm. What can we really do? What can we not do? How are we going to manage that? And so on. But now everybody is, I don't want to say in the same place on the journey at all, but we all know where north is and we're all going towards the same North Star. I'm sure, paths will change, innovation will come on and so on. And maybe where we think north is will be different in 5 years as we have better information and data and so on. But this idea of saying, we all know where we have to go. Let's do it together. Let's speak about it publicly is super important in a very authentic way. I think in the past, it was like, we have to announce, and then how are we going to get there? And now it's okay to say, we've announced, and we're not sure how we're going to get where we're trying to go, but we know we need to get there. And so I think to your point about the philanthropy and coming together to solve things, there will be a lot of strange bedfellows that are emerging now to say, if we're together, we'll innovate, we'll think differently, we can have the funding, stretch those dollars, and bring new solutions to the table. And I think that's required, for sure.
Absolutely. Yep, I fully agree. And as our friend Lorraine Pepper from Textile Exchange says, this is like a relay race. And each one of us carries the baton for a certain part of it, or we may be running with each other at some point, both holding the baton. But that is the way that this is working. And then the industry knows how this fits. And you talk about, we know where we're going. When we set an agreed upon mandate to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2030 of 45% CO2 emissions reductions in the supply chain, then we all can be part of that roadmap, right? We can all bring our piece to the table that helps bring the industry to that point. And we'll do the same with water, and we'll do the same with land as we start to set specific goals and targets.
For sure. It's like puzzle pieces, and I think the nice thing is we see everybody sort of bringing their best skills and talents, and nobody has, I'm the only one that has the full picture. That's not even so. There's such a flow of information today. Nobody can say, I'm going to solve it alone. And that's the other, I think that was even post-pandemic, frankly, the idea of one entity working alone on their issues, their goals. It brings only inefficiency. Let's share those learnings. Let's share the best practices. How do we get there together? And there's space for everybody, actually, and I think the one thing that is important is we consolidate as quickly as we can around what makes sense, because more and more folks want to come to the party of how do I drive change? And it's important that that stays somehow knitted together in a way that doesn't drive further and further fragmentation. Well, now let's all work on this issue and let's work on that, when some of the fundamental issues haven't been solved. So it's great more and more people want to get in. Important we somehow figure out how to communicate and stay aligned, that we're all driving towards the same goal.
That's right.
And that'll be tricky, I think, as we go forward here in the next wee while.
Well, and I've said that for years, is whenever it comes up, as it always does, we get into these modes of, oh no, so-and-so's doing what I'm doing, and I always say, we need the army. We need the whole planet plugged into this work, people. Like, welcome them. Let's figure out how they can align into the work streams. We don't want to compete, and, we want to create ways in which, great, we're multiplying assets and resources, but we need everybody. So I think I help myself whenever I get into those fear places, as humans we do. I go, wait, we need everybody. We need everybody.
True.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, and I think that also interesting post-pandemic is this wish to involve citizens that I don't want to call consumers. You know, I see so
Me
many
neither.
of the companies
Yeah.
thinking about how do I dialogue with my, now I'm back to consumer, but how do I dialogue with the public? What do I say about my brand that is authentic? What's my purpose as a brand? What will resonate? And then that brings up quite an interesting question of, I want to be asked to engage if I'm shopping. I want to understand what a brand values and the progress that they're making on the goals, so I can align myself and my shopping with my values and what's important to me. And maybe what's important to me might be a different goal than somebody else. You know, if I'm a surfer and I say I'm super interested in water and oceans, and that's how I'm going to shop, or somebody else might say my number one is women's rights, so I want to shop here or there. It's, again, we need everybody, and the beauty of different people adopting different issues and driving them forward, but speaking super authentically about them out to the public. I think those will be the brands that capture the market and thrive.
Yeah, I've been saying, for a while, and it's something that I heard from the futurist Faith Popcorn and her trending on arcing, which is the flood is, and this was 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, the flood is coming and many companies aren't going to survive it. And she was talking, she didn't even know about the pandemic. I don't think, maybe she did, but she was predicting everything else, right? Planetary limitations, global markets, technology, and shifting consumer interests around these topics. And she said, if you're not on the arc, if your brand doesn't get on that arc, and getting on the ticket on the arc is we're a brand that provides a service or a goods that is necessary and beneficial to the future. And if you can't describe how your product, we create economic development in a healthy and safe way. We educate women in production of facilities globally. It's going to move past just we're reducing carbon. That's going to be table stakes. It's going to be, you want a company here because we're creating healthy, happy communities globally with livelihood, right? And so all the other SDGs. And as we get into that, I think about that all the time, which is now is the time to make sure you got that ticket on the arc. Right.
Totally, for sure. I mean, I grew up in the business where we sent out disassembled parts and they would come back assembled. And we didn't have I don't want to date myself too much, but the idea of how much information and the visuals that we have from around the world, the information, the climate change, even from all of the satellites and what we're able to see about our own planet, it's totally different. So I'm always saying I'm a 50-year-old millennial. And I don't think the millennials are so different. They have better information than we had, and they're making different decisions. And the more we have that information, I think the more rapidly things will go. And weirdly, in the sea and flood of information that we're all always in, what's authentic somehow resonates. The magic, why is that thing trending, or why are people attracted to it? There's something about what's real that emerges and kind of comes out of the top of the tornado of news and noise. And that's really, I hope and believe, got to be based in truth, in proper behavior, in respecting people, like common home, common family, and how do we do those things together. And I think if you're speaking to that, that is what will resonate.
Common good and benefit. That's right. Well, I love it. So tell me about Responsible Business Coalition and what you all are doing and working on now.
Yeah, so Responsible Business Coalition is now, since the first time with those shirts that we started, so it's 47 CEOs, 275 brands. And over the years together, we've aligned on what is the collective impact agenda that we want to work on. We had the opportunity to inform the Fashion Pact, obviously with all of the CEO work that had been done as that was pulling out of the gates, and really look at what are the places where the industry needs to lean in collectively quickly. And so there's a whole series of different agenda items, and one of the ones that spun out of the CEO coalition, which kind of happened, I would call that hot potatoes. Like at the end of every CEO meeting, we just open forum. What are you working on? What are you worried about? And originally came up, how do we speak to the customers and educate them without making every time you shop for something sad and heavy, right? I mean, me too. I'm a sustainability person. Every time I buy a lipstick or a blouse, I don't want to be like, oh gosh, I need to be uncomfortable about my purchases. We're all going to be wearing clothes and eating food and, all of that. So the idea of how do we dialogue with customers in a constructive way was one conversation in that meeting, early meeting. One was, how do we amplify and empower women's education? Now, if we look at the pandemic, we are onshoring, we are nearshoring, we are automating all of the, again, technology that's informing what we make and how we make it is going to create a ripple effect like we saw in the pandemic. As everything closed, we all saw the workers in the disadvantaged and vulnerable communities that were in a terrible situation. So I think the idea of how do we educate, how do we empower, how do we upskill into the future is critical. And then we're all on this, of course, we have to decarbonize as quickly as we can. So these were three, what appeared to us to be kind of disconnected, disparate issues. And that all wound into what is now Fashion Makes Change, that got launched this year, almost like a Responsible Business Coalition spinoff. That we had hoped would launch earlier. We got, I would say, with the pandemic delayed, and maybe better. It turned out to be more important to have it launch in alignment with International Women's Day. And that's really, I would say, an ecosystem solution. Again, these strange bedfellows coming together. Lots of brands engaging with their consumers to say, we're already educating women in the supply chain. And as you're shopping, if you want to round up your purchase to the nearest dollar to help amplify women's education and empowerment around the world, kind of join us. We're all in, whether you're in a CVS or wherever you are, in Uber, everybody's saying, do you want to round up? And it's a customer's choice. So I think opening that invitation to say, we as retail and fashion together can work collaboratively to really drive and scale education in our supply chain communities. As we know these changes in the business are coming, how do we front run that? Is quite interesting. And that's brands and retailers talking about where are we producing, actually. And we work with Empower at Work, which is another ecosystem solution made up of GAP's PACE program, BSR Her, ILO, with their Better Work program and CARE. And they're looking at who's been educated on what. What's the educational stack we need? What's the gold standard in women's education? Where are the KPIs that we see really change lives and build resiliency into communities? Then we have fantastic PR Consulting working with us. We have Shopify working with us, which is a platform that built an app for us with Pledge to create an instant kind of easy way at point of sale to load up an app and say, can I have a Fashion Makes Change engagement with my consumers and donate as well? So lots of strange people coming together, strange people, for just in a way to say.
Yeah.
But all of these, I'm bringing my skill set. And if my skill set is media, or my skill set is a merchant platform, or my skill set is I'm a brand and I can engage with consumers, or there are all of those nonprofits that are there really creating the on the ground programming. Now they're all together. And so that feels like a very important thing for us to be scaling now, and a spin-off out of the RBC. And we're all talking now about uniform customer labeling. What is that going to look like? And so lots on the horizon, but an interesting time.
Well, I love Fashion Makes Change because it's such a simple and easy act. And I think for many listening to this, we can all imagine ourselves at whether we're at Whole Foods or whether we're at, any number of stores that we might interact with. We're often asked, do you want to round up the change to benefit X, Y, Z? And I think it's an easy way, and the amount of funding that it can actually attract is tremendous and does such great good, even though it might only be a couple pennies to the citizen consumer at that checkout point. So if I want to be part of that and participate, you mentioned Spotify, but where would I go buy if I'm buying something? Where should I look for this?
So it's scattered all around. Lots of the department stores from Macy's, Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, Ralph Lauren, a lot of the partners, big and small. I think quite interesting in particular is on the Shopify platform, which is a merchant ecosystem. There you'll see prompts when you're checking out, and they will invite you to do that in a way that is evergreen. And we're going to have lots of kind of push periods and media periods during the year, obviously around Climate Week as we move into Fashion Week and Climate Week together in September. That period, you'll see quite a bit of us again. Also around the period of Giving Tuesday, obviously, where everybody is thinking about shopping and giving at the same time, on the heels of all of the sort of holiday period and shopping period. So we hope to build momentum and movement, and I think it's a sort of a testament to the ability to collaborate, the ability to build something.
I think it's wonderful, and it's a way that individuals can get started in participating in this work, because I know that it's now, with sustainability and fashion and coming up in all the major publications and all the media, and of course I'm probably getting all the alerts more than the average person, but it seems like it's such a big topic. People are going to say, how can I be part of this? How can I choose the right products? How can I get back to some of these programs, et cetera? So thank you for that, and we'll put all the information for people to find out more in all the blasts of this podcast.
Please.
So as we end, which I don't want to do, but as we end, I want to know where you get your inspiration from, because you are very inspiring and your work is critical. Where are you drawing your inspiration? Books, leaders, heroes, podcasts? Tell me.
I would say I live my life feeling thrilled and terrified, generally, because I didn't really know what we were starting when we started. So the idea that all of those CEOs in the industry and the fashion conveners and Fashion Makes Change, and even the relationship on data that we have with Accenture, like that, all of that could come together into an orchestra that plays together, I would not have dreamed in my wildest imagination. But now that it has, and so many people are engaged, I feel responsible to do things better and bigger and faster, and to drive that collaboration and build solutions. So I think probably the thrill of progress and the fear of it not being fast enough is one thing. Favorite book, which is, I think probably you could see that even behind me there, is a tiny little book called The Warrior of the Light. And I open that all the time, every day, like, which way should I go? Please send a message, because we need some help from the angels and from the stars and so on. So I think there's a lot of heroes around. You know, I could name a lot of them, and I think you see heroic acts everywhere in all of the people in this community and beyond. And so, yeah, I guess there's lots of inspiration if you're looking for it. And I try to weave all of that together and soldier on, because I think, you wonder, we all think, I think this year too, what's your purpose? What's your mission? Why are you here? And weirdly, the ingredients of my life landed me in this place. And so you hope to make a little difference in your corner of the world and knit some dots together if you can.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm gonna get a copy of that book. Thank you for that recommendation.
I will send it to you. Yeah, as my thanks for being on Lewis and Friends, I have to send you the book.
I love it. Well, Cara Smyth, thank you so much for joining me today and for inspiring. Really, what you've done to bring us together as a community of practice has been so powerful, and I know you're doing it in a lot of different groups and pockets. So thank you for this work.
Thank you. And back at you, Lewis. It takes all of us together. So thank you so much for having me today. It's a great pleasure.
Great. Have a good evening.
You too. Thanks so much. Bye. Bye.